My parents drained my entire $50,000 college fund for my sister's extravagant 21st birthday. When I exposed them to our family, a random comment led to a DNA test that destroyed them all. My name is Alara, and for 20 years, I thought I was happily married. For the last 15 of those years, our lives revolved around my husband Matteo's demanding job. He was the head of the night shift at the Midwest Steel and Manufacturing Plant, a job he always said was grueling, backbreaking work, but necessary to give our daughter, Sophia, the best life possible. Our life wasn't glamorous. I was a high school English teacher, and I spent my evenings clipping coupons and meticulously planning our budget around his modest salary. I was proud of that. I was proud to support a man who sacrificed his nights, his sleep, his very health, for his family. On the evening of our 20th wedding anniversary, I was in the kitchen searing 2 beautiful cuts of steak. The aroma filled our small, tidy home. Matteo was upstairs, getting ready for another shift, the familiar sounds of his heavy work boots on the floorboards echoing above me. A spontaneous, romantic idea bloomed in my chest. I would pack up this dinner, his favorite, and surprise him at the mill. He had always been so strict about the no visitors policy, citing safety regulations and heavy machinery. But 20 years was a milestone. Surely, for one special night, it would be okay. I packed everything into a basket, the steaks, a thermos of coffee, a slice of the cheesecake I'd made. I felt a giddy excitement I hadn't felt in years. I drove through the quiet suburban streets, the basket warming the passenger seat beside me. When I turned onto the industrial road leading to the steel mill, my heart began to sink. The massive gates, which I'd only ever seen in pictures, were rusted shut, chained and padlocked. The windows of the main building were shattered, dark, and gaping like empty eye sockets. Weeds, thick as my arm, choked the parking lot. The place was a ghost town. A single dim light glowed from a small security shack near the gate. I parked my car, my hands trembling as I approached the shack, and met the gaze of an elderly security guard, Senor Romero, reading a newspaper. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm looking for my husband, Matteo. He's the night shift supervisor." He peered at me over his glasses, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Ma'am, I don't know who you're talking about. This mill has been shut down for 10 years. 10 years. The words didn't compute. They hung in the cold night air, meaningless and monstrous. My mind reeled, trying to reconcile the reality of this derelict graveyard with the 15 years of stories, of exhaustion, of sacrifice. I stumbled back to my car and sat in the driver's seat, the world tilting on its axis. The smell of the steak in the basket was suddenly nauseating. And then, the memories started flooding in, sharp and cruel, a museum of exhibits dedicated to his lies. I saw him, 5 years ago, coming home with a gleaming, expensive watch on his wrist. My eyes had widened. "Matteo, that's beautiful." "How?" He had smiled that tired, noble smile of his. "The company gave it to me. A bonus for perfect attendance and supervising the most productive shift." I remember beaming with pride, telling all my friends what a dedicated worker he was. Now, I pictured him standing in a jewelry store, paying for it with cash I never knew he had. I saw him a year later, packing a suitcase. "A week-long corporate training seminar in Florida," he'd explained. "It's mandatory." He complained about the spotty cell service the entire time he was gone, his calls brief and staticky. The truth, a hideous image, now burned in my mind, him on a sunny beach, not with colleagues, but with someone else. The most vivid memory was the most mundane. It was from just a few months ago, in our kitchen. I had bought a brand of cereal for Sophia that was $2 more expensive than the generic store brand. Matteo had seen the receipt on the counter and his face had darkened. He held it up, his finger jabbing at the price. "Alara, we've talked about this," he'd said, his voice laced with weary disappointment. Every single dollar counts. Do you have any idea how hard I work in that heat, with that noise, just to keep us afloat? I had apologized, my cheeks burning with shame. I had felt so selfish. Now, the memory made me physically sick. He wasn't a martyr. He was an actor. And I was his most devoted, and most foolish, audience. My life wasn't a partnership, it was a performance. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost, because Senor Romero stepped out of his shack, his expression softening from confusion to pity. Are you all right, ma'am? I couldn't speak, just shook my head. The name Mateo seemed to spark something in his memory. You know, he said slowly, it's strange. I see a man who looks a lot like the picture you showed me. Drives a fancy new BMW. He doesn't come here, of course. I see him over in Willow Creek Estates when I drive home. Always at the same house. Willow Creek Estates. The name was a punch to the gut. It was the wealthiest suburb in our county, a world of sprawling modern homes and manicured lawns we could never, ever afford. Mateo's car. He'd bought a shiny black BMW 6 months ago, telling me he'd gotten a zero-interest loan through a credit union and needed a reliable car for his long commute. I had argued against the expense, but he'd insisted it was a practical necessity. Do you know the address? I asked, the words tasting like ash. He gave me a street name. It was all I needed. I drove in a daze, my mind a blank slate of shock. The familiar streets of our modest neighborhood gave way to winding roads lined with towering oak trees and houses that looked like they belonged in a magazine. And then I saw it. The street name. I drove slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs, until I found the house. It was stunning, all glass and dark wood. And parked in the driveway, gleaming under the porch light, was Mateo's BMW. My body moved on its own. I walked up the stone pathway, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I rang the doorbell. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the door swung open. It was Mateo. He was wearing comfortable sweatpants and a soft t-shirt, a wide, relaxed smile on his face. The smile vanished the instant he saw me, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Over his shoulder, a beautiful, younger woman with long dark hair appeared, wiping her hands on a dish towel. 2 small children, a boy about 10 and a girl around 7, peeked out from behind her legs, their eyes wide with curiosity. Honey, the woman said, her voice warm and melodic. Who is it? Mateo just stared at me, his face pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. I found my voice. It was cold, clear, and sharp as a shard of glass. I'm his wife, I said, looking past him to the woman. The one he told you died in childbirth. The week that followed was a blur of silent tears and sleepless nights. I moved like an automaton through my life, teaching my classes, grading papers, but my mind was a wasteland. Mateo had tried calling, texting, a barrage of pathetic excuses and desperate pleas that I ignored. He was a ghost to me now. Then, one evening, an unknown number flashed on my screen. I answered, expecting it to be him again, but it was a woman's voice, trembling but firm. Is this Alara? Yes. Who is this? My name is Valeria. It was her. The woman from the house. I need to talk to you. Please. I'm not your enemy. We met the next day at a quiet coffee shop in a town miles away from either of our homes. She was just as beautiful up close, but her eyes were filled with the same shattered look I saw in my own reflection. She told me everything. Mateo had told her his first wife, me, had died giving birth to their daughter, Sophia, and that the trauma had made it too painful to ever speak of us. He was a wealthy, successful widower. Her entire world was built on that lie. I'm an accountant, she said, her voice low and furious. "I'm the head accountant for his company, Keystone Construction. After you left, I started digging. He didn't just lie to us, Elara. He's a fraud. A serial fraudster. That's when the plan was born. We were not rivals, we were allies, forged in the fire of his betrayal. Valeria had access to everything. Over the next few weeks, she became my secret agent, my partner in righteous vengeance. She worked late into the night, emailing me encrypted files from her work computer. The scope of his deceit was breathtaking. He wasn't just a bigamist. He was evading millions in taxes. He had 2 other mistresses in different cities, both set up with apartments and allowances. He was systematically moving money to offshore accounts, preparing to sell his stake in the business and disappear, leaving all of us with nothing. Then, Valeria found the kill shot. The final, unforgivable piece of the puzzle. "Elara," she said over the phone one night, her voice tight with rage. "He forged your signature. 15 years ago, he took out a second mortgage on your house to get the seed money to start Keystone. Your home. He built his entire empire on a felony committed against you. Telling our daughter, Sophia, was the hardest thing I've ever had to do." At 19, a freshman in college, she had always idolized her father, the hard-working hero who sacrificed everything for her. I sat her down in our living room, the same room where we'd had countless modest family dinners, and I laid out the ugly, sprawling truth. I watched her heart break in real time. The disbelief, the denial, then the dawning horror, and finally, a cold, hard fury that mirrored my own. She inherited my strength, but she also had a fire I had long suppressed. She didn't cry for long. She stood up, her jaw set. "Where is his office?" she asked. I gave her the address, thinking she just needed to see it for herself. I was wrong. She wasn't going to see it, she was going to burn it to the ground. Without another word to me, Sophia drove to the glitzy downtown high-rise that housed Keystone Construction. She didn't bother with an appointment. She walked past the bewildered receptionist, her head held high, and stormed directly into the glass-walled conference room where Matteo was in the middle of a major presentation to his business partner, David, and a team of investors. All heads turned as she slammed the door open. Matteo froze, his face draining of all color. "Great presentation, Dad," Sophia said, her voice ringing with clarity and contempt, loud enough for everyone in the room, and in the open-plan office beyond, to hear. "You're really selling the dream. While you're at it, why don't you tell them about your other job? The grueling night shift at the steel mill that closed 10 years ago. Or should you start with the wife you told everyone was dead? Or maybe you can explain how my college fund, the one you said you couldn't afford, was actually spent building this palace of lies." The room was utterly silent. David stared, mouth agape, from Sophia to Matteo. My daughter, my quiet, studious daughter, had just thrown the first, and most devastating, public punch. Sophia's public detonation was the opening salvo in an all-out war. The next day, I filed for divorce. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman, looked at the mountain of evidence Valeria had compiled, the offshore account numbers, the tax documents, the proof of his other lives, and her eyes lit up. "This isn't a divorce," she said with a grim smile. "This is a demolition." Matteo, stripped of his carefully constructed facade, fought back like a cornered animal. He was vicious, shameless. His first move was to try and make me homeless. His mother, Isabel, a woman who had always looked down on me with thinly veiled contempt, sent a formal eviction notice to my house. The property, she reminded me in a venomous phone call, was in her name, a precaution she had insisted on when we first got married. "You will not get a single penny from my son, you ungrateful woman," she shrieked. But they had underestimated me. And they had no idea about the ace up my sleeve. In court, when Matteo's lawyer presented the deed in Isabel's name, my lawyer calmly presented her counter-evidence, the 15-year-old's second mortgage application. She showed the court the document, and then she showed them the expert forensic analysis. "As you can see, Your Honor," she stated, "the signature of my client, Elara, on this legally binding document, is a forgery." A gasp went through the courtroom. Forgery was a criminal offense. Matteo's business partner, David, who had been subpoenaed, took the stand and testified that the initial seed money for Keystone had, in fact, come from that very mortgage. He had been lied to as well. The media got wind of the story, the blue-collar hero who was secretly a millionaire bigamist and a fraud. It was a local sensation. His lies, once his greatest weapon, were now the bars of his own cage. The judgment was swift and brutal. Matteo lost everything. He was convicted of felony fraud and tax evasion. While he avoided prison time, the court imposed crippling financial penalties that effectively bankrupted him. The judge saw right through his pathetic attempts to hide assets in offshore accounts and shell corporations. The power had shifted completely. In the final divorce settlement, I was awarded a substantial share of Keystone Construction's remaining assets. The court nullified Isabel's claim and granted me sole ownership of our family home, recognizing that it had been secured and maintained through my income and criminally leveraged by my husband. His mother was left with nothing but the shame of her complicit son. But his greatest loss was not financial. It was the one thing he could never buy back. Sophia refused to speak to him ever again. When Valeria told her two children, Leo and Alma, the truth about their father, they wanted nothing to do with him either. He had spent 15 years building two families, and in the end, he was left with none. He would send desperate, rambling emails and leave tearful voicemails, but the lines of communication were severed. He was no longer the one who set the rules or handed out judgment. He was a beggar, and we were no longer listening. Years later, my life is unrecognizable in the best way possible. I found love again with a kind, honest man, a fellow teacher named Javier who loves books as much as I do. My own book, The Story of My Survival, which I titled The Night Shift, became an unexpected bestseller, connecting me with a community of women who had survived their own betrayals. Valeria and her kids are thriving. She used her settlement to start her own accounting firm. And Sophia, my incredible daughter, has become a wonderful, protective older sister to Leo and Alma. They spend holidays together, forging a beautiful, unconventional sibling bond from the wreckage of their father's lies. I learned that the truth, no matter how agonizing, is the only foundation for a real life. Starting over at 42 wasn't an end, it was the beginning of my freedom. Matteo recently sent a letter through his lawyer. He says he's sick and wants to see his children one last time. Valeria and I talked, and we both told our children it was their choice, but we would not facilitate it. They all refused. Were we too cruel?